All right, my name is Dave Young. So we're going to be talking about virtualization in the DOD classrooms today. Can I just see a show of hands how many people are DOD? Okay, and how many are not, but are in the support sector of some sort? How many just got lost and came to this classroom accidentally? All right, well, great. So I've been up here chit-chatting with a couple people, and there's a lot of stuff going on out there. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff. I will not be referencing any particular command by name, just because they've asked me not to. But there's some people up here that may tell you great stories about themselves, and I just pointed to you. So let's get started. So a couple things. I got to give this disclaimer. Anything I say in here is probably under NDA, so be careful what you repeat. Please don't take any pictures of anything, all that good stuff. We're not going to talk about dates, although I heard somebody announce that there's a product release coming out in a couple of weeks. I love that they keep saying a couple of weeks. But the good news is a couple of weeks is reality. Okay? So how many people have CAC card dependencies? Just a few, right? Well, the good news is PCOIP and CAC is now a done thing. Okay? So we're ready to roll with that. That comes out in this release that goes forward so that you'll be able to do that. How many people have heard the great story around zero clients? Just a few. So the great thing about a zero client is less and less operational support. Okay, so there's a lot of things happening there. And Teradici, with the PCOIP protocol, the zero clients, has done a lot of work to make sure that smart cards work from those zero devices. Okay, so that's a great thing that we're able to support. Good stuff there. So this is our typical training room. Does this look like anybody's training room? I did not take this from anywhere. I got this actually off the internet. But I want to point out some things. There's a couple things in this picture that really get our attention. Number one, old traditional PCs, right? They always break. They have moving parts, hard disks fail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we do this wonderful thing in training environments. We dedicate a classroom to a particular subject, right? Or a particular lab, and it's got a particular build on that image, and we maintain that. And heaven forbid anybody comes and asks us to update that, right? Because we have to put a lot of work into that. We figure out all the stuff, and we say, okay, we're going to put patches on it. We're going to change the classroom, all that wonderful stuff. And we're going to have our flying monkeys come in, and they're going to touch the machines, and they're going to update them so that classroom's ready to go. Now, what happens if when the students show up, this classroom's got 25 workstations in it, and there's only 5 students? We take the whole class, right? We have 20 machines sitting there doing nothing. We can't say, you know what, only 5 students showed up. Let's go to the 5-student classroom and use that so 25 students can come sit in here. This environment is dedicated, right, which is a lot of manual labor for us. So I put some notes here. Let's make sure. PCs must be maintained. There's a Gartner study that says that the amount of maintenance required on a traditional PC is around 10 hours a year, okay, per PC. So you multiply that out and you get all these great numbers, right? Image is specific to the class. I couldn't take this classroom and decide that because it's only halfway full, we need to go to a smaller classroom in the typical training environment. I have to stay in that particular area. What happens if you had a flood or something, right? You would be stuck. You couldn't repeat that class because it's there, okay? Machines begin to drift. So how many times have we had to reset a classroom? We all love that, right? Because students do things, they mess around with things, they delete things, all that wonderful stuff that nullifies that image. So as they drift, we have to do resets to the classroom, which is manpower intensive. Hardware failures, right? We always love hardware failures. A machine goes down, the student can move over, but anything that student was working on is probably lost, right? So if they were doing a large project, it's probably stuck on that hard drive that went belly up, and we're not able to recover that for the students, so they have to start over. Theft. I always love when I go into a classroom and I'm like, the mouse is missing, CD-ROM drive's missing, all those wonderful things. That starts to add up for us. And then setup. When I was in the civilian world, I used to work a lot with universities, and it always made me laugh when we go into universities and we do that whole setup thing. And we couldn't just come in, the Friday before the class started and reset everything. We had to do it a couple days, couple weeks in advance, right? Which meant that room was then frozen for that particular environment. We're going to change some of those things. And then, would the classroom be canceled if something happened to that? And that's what I'm talking about. When the sprinklers go off, would you have to cancel the class, or would you be able to just walk into another room and fire your environments up? So with the VMware View solution, we can change a lot of this stuff. It's all about automation. How many people have heard about VClones? Just a couple. Okay, so I'm going to go a little deeper into what VClones are. VClones are our ability to take a master image, okay, and deploy multiple machines from that master image. So if I had, we're going to use, for example, Windows XP with Service Pack 2. I'm talking link clones. Yeah, VClones, sorry. Yeah, link clones. Anybody heard it from link clones? SBI, there's a whole bunch of names out there. So as we look at this, we're able to take a classroom environment. So this first one I have up here has a 10 gig image. I deploy it out. Instead of making hundreds and hundreds of copies of that image, I make links to that image, okay? And when I make that link, it's basically an overlay technology. Imagine when we were all in high school, because it looks like everybody's at least my age. When we were in high school, the teachers had overlays, right? And they put down the master overlay, and they put another overlay on top of that, and they'd write on it. Well, that's what the overlay piece, the link is. It's just a layer that lays on top that the two combined represent my operating system. All right, so as I start to look at this, I can deploy those links out very efficiently. The links actually take seconds to build. Okay? And then there's a couple moments or minutes where the actual link customizes itself and becomes its own entity. Okay? So it will have its own unique host name, its own unique MAC, its own unique IP address, et cetera, as we start to build it. Now, the benefit of this is I build one classroom image, okay, image A up here, and I create links to it, and automation takes over. I no longer have to be involved as an IT person with the instructor's classroom. Okay? The instructor says, hey, I'm going to have 25 seats. Great, we build out 25 machines, and automation takes over. When the user, the student, logs out of that machine, we can destroy it. So it's done. We can say, hey, you know what? Every Monday, we want to rebuild this whole entire environment because I have a new class starting on Monday. I've got a WordPerfect class starting or a Word 2010 class starting, whatever it is. I can start that new class, rebuild those images so that on the fly, my new environment is built. Okay? Now, the other thing that we can do is we can do updates to that environment. So instead of having to touch 15, 25 machines, I touch one image. And when I touch that one image, I can apply those changes for all future use. So we can do what we call recompose. And as soon as I do a recompose, my users will get prompted. Right? I can tell them to do it right now. Right? We had a virus come through. We were going to fix the virus so that nobody else has that problem. Fix it right now. Right? So my users get forced to log off. As soon as they log off, their old machine's destroyed. They log back in, a new machine is created for them, and they have the update. And that could be going from Office 2007 to Office 2010, or Service Pack 2 to Service Pack 3. It could also be going from Windows XP to Windows Vista, or Windows 2007, or Windows 7, excuse me. Going to any of those different type environments on the fly as we entitle users. Now, there's a Chicago university that has taken this to the next level. They have students that come in, and as part of their registrar process, they are given access to domain groups. And those domain groups are entitled to their desktops. So when you register for a class, we'll just use two simple classes. You got the English class and you got the math class, right? So when you register for a class, you're entitled to that desktop. And when you log into your machine, right, you will see all those classes presented to you. So they have taken some automation there to apply that. So the other part of this is I can actually expand classes. So the nice part is I can build this out for, let's say, 15 users initially, and a classroom grows. It's very popular, right? So instead of having just 15 stations, I can take that to 60, to 100, to 1,000, whatever I want, because all I'm doing is adding capacity on the back end. It's almost plug and play. I can deploy out, let's say, 10 servers, have all this stuff running, and a class becomes very popular and users want more resources. I plug in additional resources, expand my pool parameters, and off and roll and I go. Okay? Any questions? You guys are awfully quiet. All right. So the other thing is how does all this work? So let's talk about this. So I can create my baseline image, and this is the wonders of VClone, build this out, and it's just a setting within the VMware View product. So I go in there, I create my pool, it's going to ask me some questions, I select my base image, and then I choose Next. And as I do that, it deploys this image out into the master storage array. Okay? So if I have multiple volumes available, it'll deploy a copy out to each of the volumes so that we can create the links and move forward. Right? So that master image is deployed out there. And then I create the link. And the link is just that overlay. So each user would have their own independent link that's available to them. And then we do some stuff around profiles. So one of the things that we do is move the user profile to a separate disk. which gives me the ability to retain my user settings, what applications they had, what shortcuts they had, how their wallpaper was set up, how their mouse was set up, all that wonderful stuff. And we can even put their My Documents out there if you want, so that they can actually have that on its own data disk, so that when we recompose this machine and they come back in, they regain access to that environment. Okay? So then the next piece is we want to share or store the user's profile out on a share where they can keep their data and all that wonderful stuff. And then the last piece is our ThinApp piece. Okay? Now, ThinApp in an educational environment is really, really important because it allows me to isolate my application from my operating system. And it gives me the ability to take something and run applications side by side. So one of the applications that's really, really difficult to do that with is Office. If I have an environment with Office 2007, it's very difficult to also run Office 2010 unless you virtualize that application, which gives us the ability to deliver applications independent of the operating system, which is important. How many times have you ever had to tell a user, well, let's go back a second. How many people have dependencies on IE6? Just a few, yeah? IE6, wonderful thing, right? And we're going to have to rewrite a whole bunch of applications in order to get those migrated over and all that wonderful stuff. Well, with ThinApp, we can take that IE6 application and run it on Windows 7 under IE8, right? So I can have IE6 running, I can have IE8 running on a Windows 7 machine. And because I'm isolating the application away from the operating system. How many times have you had Java conflicts? We always love those, right? This version of Java doesn't work with that application. You have to tell the end user, oh, we're sorry. You know, that application that you bought and you're wanting to deploy, you have to wait. You have to wait until I finish upgrading the environment. And Sally over here gets her stuff all fixed, and we can upgrade her. So by virtualizing the application, we can make them independent of the operating system. I call that separating the user from the administrator. Okay? The operating system belongs to us. We need to be able to update it, maintain it, but we can separate the user space out so that it's independent. Okay? By doing that, when we do these recomposes, when the user logs back in, all their stuff just comes back to them. Okay? And we can do just-in-time provisioning. I don't have to deploy applications to machines just because I need them there. I can deploy applications basically via shortcut. Okay? So I put the shortcut out there, and Joe comes in tomorrow and says, hey, I need Visio. Right? And I'm like, all right, Joe, you get Visio. So I grant them access to that shortcut, and now they have Visio. I don't have to do a push. I don't have to do an install or any of that stuff. How many people stage applications so that you can have them delivered quickly? Right? According to the letter of the law, if you do that, you must license that application. Right? And you're licensing that, right? Just say yes. Yeah. Okay, great. So when we license that, we're over-provisioning. And if you actually went back and did some research, you'd probably find out that not all those applications are being used, right? And you might be able to save some money if you didn't deploy them. But us people in IT, we're a little paranoid, we get yelled at a lot, so we over-provision things, right? I don't want the boss coming in and yelling at me that it took me 10 hours to deploy Visio, so I go ahead and stage it out there, so when the user calls, I just turn it on, off and roll, and we go. Well, with ThinApp, you can actually change the way you do that. You don't have to over-provision. You put the stuff out in the share, you launch it from a shortcut, and you do just-in-time provisioning because we're not really worried about the whole install process. Okay? That goes away. We're launching it from the share, and we're transferring the pieces that load into memory to the machine so that we can go forward with it. Now, that does not change our licensing requirements. If I entitle that application to 100 users, I must license 100 users. But I don't have to license 1,000 users because I just in case wanted to be ready. Okay? So you can change the way you do your licensing because you are doing just-in-time provisioning versus staging. Any questions on that? All right. So as we start to create that machine, that becomes my environment. So as I deploy this, I can then build out this machine, have it customized to me, and then I can go through this whole update process. And let's just go through this real quick. So I go in and they're installing, I think they're installing IE7 or 8 or something like that. But a service pack, create a new version of the operating system, and I deploy that out there. I do my recompose. My users get prompted, and the question comes up, do you want to do this now? They say yes. We delete their machine. We re-provision them a new machine, and literally I could have updated a machine in 5 minutes. It's a lot different than what we used to do when we touch machines, right? How long would it take you to deploy a service pack out to a couple hundred machines? Anybody? Couple hours, right, if you're lucky. maybe a couple days. I call that the spray and pray methodology. I spray it out there and pray it takes place. How many people are stuck with hard guidelines on when you have to have things resolved? Patch Tuesday comes, and you got somebody with a little silver thing on their shoulder asking you, is it done, is it done, is it done? And we go through that whole thing, and then we go through remediation. So I sprayed it out to 1,000. There's 400 of them that took effect. There's 200 that need to be rebooted. There's 80 of them that are failing for some odd reason. So I go touch them and play with them, make them work, and off and on I go. Very long, drawn-out process. Gartner says that roughly takes 80 hours to complete that patch process, right, as we start to look at that. Under View, you literally could have that done in minutes, okay? Be done with it. When they ask you, is it done? You can say, yeah, it wasn't a hot priority patch, so I deployed it out, and it's going to take place by Friday, right? Because all my users will be booted off by Friday. Or not a hot priority, or a hot priority, and I wanted it done right now. So you could literally have that done 100% guaranteed within 10, 15 minutes. Big change in how we're updating machines, which is important as we start to look at an educational environment because it gives me the ability to have multiple environments running. So as we start to look at this, a couple of the pieces that come into play is the protocol, right? Very important for DOD is the fact that this now supports smart cards, right? And it gives me the ability to take a protocol from the LAN and push it out across the WAN. How many people have been in our labs downstairs? Just a few. I encourage everybody to go in there and take a closer look. Take a look from an admin perspective, not from an end user perspective that's trying to take a lab to learn something, but look at it from an admin perspective. And when I walked out of the lab this morning, they had already served up 4,500 unique training environments. 4,500, okay? It's been running for 2 days, or a day and a half. So we'd already served up 4,500. When I was in there, there was 350 concurrent training sessions running, and there was 18 unique training sessions. So when I say unique, you pile them up. There was the view session, there was the whatever session, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at that and you go in there, they're not assigning people to a particular seat. Let's say this gentleman here wants to learn about Composer, and he wants to take the Composer lab. They're not saying, well, you need to come over to the Composer area, and there's only 4 seats because it's really not a popular class. They're sitting you anywhere, okay? You go anywhere you want, go in, take your class, off and running you go. And then when you're done, it decomposes itself, and you come in for the next class. So you could literally sit in there for several hours and take 20, 30 classes if you wanted, okay? And as we're running through this, it's all hosted. If you want to know more about the architecture, there's actually 3 data centers hosting that. There's 480 workstations, 3 data centers, 52 remote sessions that are outside of the training environment. And they're all being hosted from 3 data centers. One's in Florida, one's in Virginia, and one is here. Okay, we had to have one here just in case something happened. That was a requirement from Paul Moritz. And they're all going across a T3, OC3, out to the remote site. So we got 45 megs to each of those sites, and the users are running off of those. Any questions about that training environment? You guys all, well, guys and gals, if you go down there and you want to know more, just ask them for a more advanced tour instead of just taking the lab, and they'll take you around and show you some of the stuff. But it's definitely an interesting environment. Anybody from the VA here? I think I've met you before, haven't I? Didn't we have dinner a couple years ago? Yeah. Yeah, and where are you at with your View deployment? Not yet, okay. And I'm going to use you as an example because what she explained to me a couple years ago was they have a huge requirement to train people, right? And you guys have off-site training classes, you spend months and months planning them, et cetera, et cetera. And I was kind of laughing. I'm like, the way to do that is the VMware way, right? And just to kind of highlight on that, when we started, now we've got months and months into our training environment, but it really all started on Friday. That's when everything started getting built, deployed, and configured for this environment. So we started Friday night, and I think they said Saturday afternoon everything was done, okay? And that's pretty impressive when you look at that. 480 workstations in there. And then we got cool things. We can tell which ones are in use and all that wonderful stuff and how many classes are going on, all that great stuff. But to go in and in less than 24 hours be able to deploy 480 training systems, right, is pretty impressive. And how much do you think that would be worth paying for? A lot, right? Yeah, if you look at all the manpower that you put into your training environments, you couldn't get it done in a day, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. So a lot of work going on there. The last thing, let's talk about some of these additional features. So I just want to go in here. Role-based administration. So our goal as IT people is not to have to do everything, right? Everybody shake your head, yes. Being the go-to person is not necessarily a good thing, okay? Because when you want to take a couple weeks off and go on vacation, guess what they require you to do? Carry that cell phone, right? If you are the go-to person, you're the single point of failure, and they're going to want to keep you close at heart. So what we want to do is delegate, so that when we're gone, we don't have to do anything. So one of the things we could do is we could delegate to someone the ability to administer that pool. So one of the things we could do is give them the ability to manage that pool. Add, create, modify machines, okay? Update images, add resources, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as you do this, you need to put some smarts behind this, or you'll be like a buddy of mine that gave the help desk access to this. And all of a sudden, he called me up. He was in a panic. He's like, I only bought 100 licenses, but we've got like 400 machines running. I've got a little problem. And what had happened is the IT help desk had gotten a call from a user. It said no resources available. So they poked around in here. They expanded the pool from 100 to 1,000 because that made that problem go away, right? And he called me because he had gotten a complaint that there wasn't any more CPU resources available. So you got to be careful how you do that, but you could delegate those resources to someone so that they can manage it. So you don't have to be that manage point, okay? So the other thing is creating a repository of applications. So how many people have heard about ThinApp? How many people are deploying ThinApps? Gosh, you guys are hard workers then. If you're not deploying them, you're taking the hard way. So one of the beautiful things about ThinApp is once I've virtualized the application, I don't really have to go through deep regression testing for all my OSs. And I don't have to worry that this application uses IE6 and that one uses IE7 or Java 1. Whatever, all that wonderful stuff. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I put them out there and I deploy them. And then one of the things that we can do from a view perspective is I can take that application, put it into my repository so it automatically deploys out to my pools. Okay? So imagine going through and doing an update from, let's say, Office 2007 to Office 2010. A lot of work involved in that, correct? Well, now you can do that in about 4 hours. Create the package, test the package, go into your pool, import it, and assign it to your pool. Off and rolling you go. And your users would then have Office 2007 and Office 2010, or maybe just Office 2010 because we want to pull out 2007. It gives us independence from that application. All right? Any questions on that? Yes?
What version of
I cannot comment on what version that is. Yes, this is some new stuff you will be seeing here shortly. If you're not in our beta program, you wouldn't have recognized this. So yes, this is some new stuff. And it gives me the ability to actually push my applications to the desktop. One of the complaints that we got, and we still get, is people want ThinApp to have its own distribution model. Right? They want it to be an ESD, an enterprise system or software device. And we keep saying, no, that's not what we do. We're independent. If you want to use Microsoft, go ahead, use Microsoft. Take the ThinApp, plug it in there, deploy it with Microsoft. If you want to use Altiris, go ahead, use Altiris. If you want to use AD group permissions, go ahead, use AD. Whatever it is you want to do, go ahead, do. But customers continue to complain because they wanted to use a tool, right? They wanted a tool from VMware. So the VMware View side of the house built this piece so that we can deploy applications to View-managed machines. So if you have virtual desktops that are managed with View, I can now deploy ThinApps to that environment without a third party, okay, giving us a little bit of flexibility. Any other questions on that? All right. So the next piece is our dashboard. What this gives me the ability to do is see what kind of applications I have and what is deployed and what is licensed. So we go back to that just-in-time licensing model. So I buy 10 licenses for Visio. I deploy 9 of them. Life is good. I need to deploy 11. Well, guess what? It's going to show up in here, and we could actually put a error to the end user, but it will show up in here and how many we have licensed, how many is installed, and then the highest active, so that we can do some more true licensing when it comes to that third-party application. Instead of just guessing, we can actually pick the number of licenses that we're currently using, and then deploy additional if we need to. And that additional would be as simple as you going through your paperwork process to buy another license, taking that count, updating it so that your applications get deployed appropriately. Any questions on that? Yes, sir? It depends on what you want to do. Either somebody from Microsoft comes in and sues you, No. It gives you can do one of two things. You can deny it, or you can true up. So you could set your level higher and let it go ahead deploy, and then have a process where you review this weekly, and you go from 10 to 11, you purchase another license. Microsoft would love that if you did that. Any other questions on that? Okay. I have one customer out of Chicago, because that's where I used to live, that I worked with, that took this whole concept for their educational environment, and when you registered for a class, like they had a CAD program that they paid a lot of money for, when you registered for the class, it gave you permission to that application. It was virtualized. They built in a database front end to the application, so when you launched the Thin app, it would go register with the database, insert your student ID, and lock a license for you. Right? And then when you close the application, it would remove that lock from the license and allow somebody else to take it. So they went from having like 150 licensed copies of this application down to 15, because they were able to say, here's how many people are truly using it, and go from there. So a lot of things that you can do in regards to licensing. One of the things, if you ever see Dean Flaming or Travis Sales speak, one of the things that they always say is ethics don't ship with the code. Just because I can over-deploy this does not mean you should, okay? Because we decided to make it very easy for you to deploy hundreds and hundreds of copies of Visio does not mean you should. You need to make sure that you follow your licensing. Any other questions on licensing? All right. So a little bit about what this looks like, and then we'll get deeper into the technology. So I have my thin client. And this thin client can be a recycled PC. It could be a true thin client. It could be what I call a chubby client, which is XPE, right? Or it could be a zero client. Any of those clients, any mix of those clients that you want, you can have. I actually have, sitting up here, my personal client. I'll just show you guys. I got a cool new Droid phone. It's awesome. Man, this is the greatest thing in the world. But I've got my Wise Pocket Cloud on here. So I can connect back to corporate, bring up my desktop, do cool little things, and really look cool in front of all the other geeks. Right? So it gives you a cool little toy. I was watching as I was waiting for this room to become available. There was a guy that was having an emergency back at the office, and he was sitting on his iPad with a remote session back to the office, fixing his server. I'm like, that is awesome. I remember when I first came to VMworld, we didn't get to do things like that. Heck, it was hard enough getting an internet connection here. But to be able to go back to the office and fix something without having to leave the conference was pretty impressive. So then we have the connection server. And the connection server applies two things for us. It gives us the ability to broker users, get them to the right resources, and it gives the admins an ability to create resources. So there's two sides of that, the user side and then the administrator side. Now, one of the things that we've got to point out here that's really, really important is you've got to have Microsoft Active Directory. We are very AD dependent. We actually install Atom on the connection server so that we don't have to change your AD, don't have to do schema changes, any of that good stuff, so that we're independent of that. But you do have to have Active Directory, okay? And then it rides on vSphere. There's not a special version of vSphere needed, okay? It's just normal vSphere. You don't have to buy any special licensing. One of our people from Karasoft could talk to you all day long about the differences in licensing. But it's just a vSphere license. And one of the things that we give you when you buy a license, you can license this per concurrent user. So let's say I have 500 concurrent users. I buy a 500 pack, and what that gives me is all the vSphere licenses I need, my concurrent user license, it gives me my thin app licenses, it gives me my VClone, my offline licenses, my connection licenses, and, where is it? The vCenter licenses. So it gives me all those things I need for a concurrent user. And if your applications run, say we're hosting 500 users, I got 3 servers in there, and everything's wonderful, and all of a sudden you need more servers, you don't have to call us. You plug in a couple more servers, add it to the environment, and off and rolling you go. Okay? I actually had a customer, government customer, had a problem. They were freaking out. They had a couple hundred users running on View. They deployed an application update that really ate up resources. So instead of having 2 servers, they needed to have 4 servers. And they called me up, and they're like, what do I need to buy? I said, you don't need to buy anything. And they're like, what? And I explained it to them. They're like, that's awesome. I said, but more importantly, let's fix that resource. Let's figure out what's going on with that application that's eating up all those resources. And they said, oh, we already did that, but it's a contract, and it's going to cost us $1.2 million to do it, so it's cheaper to buy hardware and throw at it. So you didn't have to buy anything additional from VMware. They bought a few servers, threw it at it, and off and rolling they went. And then eventually the application cleaned itself up. So the connection process. How many people have actually logged into a View Workstation? Just a few? Okay, for those of you that haven't, I grabbed these screenshots just so we can talk about it, because it's important to see what your end user is going to see. So you can see this is actually from our VMware View environment. So we go in there, you bring up the client, this is what the user sees on their desktop, you put in your credentials. I'm actually logging in to do an expense report when I took all these. Put in your credentials, and then you get your pools available to you. So you can see I have 2 pools, okay? And your user could have 220, 220 if you wanted, and they just have resources that they can click on, okay? And that is a desktop. And if I wanted to bring both of those up, because I want to do my expense reports really, really fast, here you can see where the user could have on one monitor, one desktop, on the other monitor, another desktop. They can be, layered on top of each other. You can make them both full screen. You can make them minimized, whatever you want to do so that your user can have a training environment. There's a command in Arizona that when a user takes a particular lab, they have 9 machines that they use. 9 machines. And they fire these all up. They got quad monitors. They lay them all out, and they go through these exercises. Fixing machines, doing application updates, all that wonderful stuff. So you could have as many of these up as you want. Any questions on that piece? All right. So a little bit about the Q&A session. We have our mobile piece. Please go in and fill out your feedback. But I wanted to open this up to general questions, design questions, all that wonderful stuff that you people want to ask. So I'm going to open it up for questions, and off and on we go. Yes? You need Wi-Fi to use that. Yeah, so one of the cool things about my phone is it has a built-in hotspot. Did I tell you I really like this phone? I was actually out there trying to use the Wi-Fi, and it's a little overloaded. Other questions? Yes? So it is technically... Okay. It does need to be. So the question is, where do I have to store the user profile? If you want to use folder redirection or what we're doing for user data disk, it is a VMDK. Okay. You can look at third-party products. There's a couple of them out there right now. Liquidware Labs is one of them. They have a product called Profile Unity, and it will allow you to store that profile in a lot of different areas. Okay. You can store it locally. You can store it on a share. There's a lot of options there. Pretty interesting product. It also allows you to do something really cool. I can take my machine, log into my XP machine, have my profile created, and then go over and log into my Windows 7 machine. It'll convert my profile, bring it in, and off and roll I go. Okay, so some good stuff there. Take a look at it. Definitely worth doing your research on. Other questions? Yes? What is my solution for software that needs a physical key? Are you talking like a USB dongle? There's number one solution is put pressure on the vendor and say, why do you require this? I've had a lot of vendors give software keys after that, okay, because they understand you're going through a whole process. They want to be part of that process, and they change. The other thing you can do is there's a couple products out there. USB Anywhere is one of them, okay, where you can plug those devices in, map a user to them. The other thing is within ThinApp, you can actually mimic devices. So some of those applications rely on a hardware ID coming from the hard disk or a CPU ID, things like that. And you can mimic those in the application, right? So that when the ThinApp throws up, it sees a particular drive serial number, and often only go from there. So there are answers to how to do that, but remember, rule number one, ethics don't ship with the code. So once you change those parameters and you do cheat, and I'll tell you a funny story about my son cheating. He took a game that required a CPU ID. ThinApped it. Thought life was wonderful because he told me that he came to me one Saturday morning. He said, Dad, the fact that you won't let me install games on my machine is child abuse. He's 9 years old. Yeah, and I paused for a second. I said, boy, I'm going to show you what child abuse is. And I got to thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? If you can ThinApp your application, I'll let you run your game. So he got the manual, played around in the lab, and ThinApped it. Was very successful, about 3 hours. He was very, very happy. Then he realized that if he put it on his thumb drive, he could take it to his mom's. That was really cool. And then he realized he could give a copy to his best friend. which was even cooler. And then he realized that if he took that thumb drive to school and plugged it in at school, he could play his game at school. And then I got a good call from my buddy Marcus Smith at the grade school. And Marcus, he's the principal. He says, Dave, we got a problem. And I said, what's that? And he says, we're going to have to expel your son from school. And I said, why, what happened, right? And he said, well, your son hacked into our computers and installed the game. A little light bulb goes off. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, he didn't. I said, Marcus, I'll be there in about 5 minutes. So I go up to the school. He shows me what he did. And I said, yeah, he didn't hack into your machine. You gave him execute permissions. He executed an application off of his thumb drive. He didn't install anything. There's no proof of it's there, right? It's only on the thumb drive. So Marcus kind of argued with me. He says, but our rules state. And I said, look, if you really want to get technical on it, the letter that we signed said he won't install anything. He didn't install anything. You can't expel him. It's just not going to happen. Don't fight me on it. And he says, okay. He says, I trust that you'll take care of it. Oh, yes, I did. My son was not happy after that. But what I ultimately did is I took his ThinApp application, I opened it up, and I made sure that he could only run it on the young.com domain. So now when he takes it places, it doesn't run unless he's connected to my domain. So it gave me the ability to tighten that down once again, because ethics don't ship with the code. So there are ways to get around it, and there are ways to tie it down so that you can make it secure. Other questions? Yes, sir. Gotcha. So the question is how do you package, ultimately? So if you have a team that is doing packaging, one of the things I have found is ThinApp is not hard to learn. They already understand all this stuff about how to make an application work in their environment. And you could literally give this to them, and if they're of average intelligence, in about 4 hours, they're going to be cranking out MSIs, okay, or ThinApps, all right? So not a hard process to do there. All we do technically is a capture. So the actual piece of capturing an application is really simple. You take a machine, you install the ThinApp sequencer or capture device, you turn it on, and it does an inventory of your machine. It does all the registries and all the files. You install your application, next, all right? You then close your application and do a post scan. And that post scan basically creates an inventory of everything that changed on the machine since your initial scan. And then once you have all that stuff out, it dumps it out into a folder, and then you click Create Package, and off and rolling it goes. So it adds maybe 5 minutes of work to a typical install. Okay? Now, one of the things that we typically see is the capture process isn't the hard piece. What is hard is all the knowledge about the application. Okay? And I've been in, I'll use somebody as an example, down in San Diego. I was with a client, and they wanted to ThinApp this application. How many people have heard of Ulta? None of you? Oh, you have? Yeah, Ulta is probably the bane of your existence right now. Ulta is the application that they use in DOD medical. Okay? So if you ever went and see a doctor in the DOD, they have this application, doctor fires up, they put all your personal information in there, you know, Dave's got this receding hairline type stuff. And it's called Ulta. Now, if you ask any doctor what Ulta stands for, you'll get a whole bunch of incorrect terms, none of which we're going to repeat. But this Ulta application, they wanted to ThinApp. So we fired up the sequencer, started doing the install, and I'm like, okay, what do we do now? I hit next, now it's asking questions. He's like, I don't know. And so he said, well, you know, apparently you can't ThinApp Ulta. I said, whoa, wait a minute. Let's ask the right questions. Who would normally install this? And he said, oh, well, there's a girl, and she sits over there. And I said, well, let's go get that girl and talk to her. So we brought that girl back, and she said, well, you do this, you do that, you do this, you tweak this, you hold your hand up like this, and you do that, and off and on you go, and the application installs. It's like, great. So we did all those. We did our post scan, created the package, and then he went and deployed it to every machine in the hospital. It took us about 4 hours, end to end. Okay? And instead of spending 4 hours packaging that application or deploying that application on every desktop, they now had a ThinApp, and all they had to do is copy it out there. So it changes how we do that deployment, and most often it is that knowledge about the deployment or how you do it that you have to have. If you don't have that, you're not going to be successful. Yes? Yeah, so the question is I've already done all this hard work, and I've got my installers. How do I take advantage of that? So there's a couple products coming out from VMware in the future. One where I think we're calling it the ThinApp Factory, where you basically put a ThinApp in, it churns some stuff, converts, or excuse me, you put an MSI in, it churns some stuff and creates it into a ThinApp package. That's one way. The other way is to actually just run that installer. And what I do when I used to do packaging is I'd bring up 15 virtual machines with the ThinApp captures on there, and I'd run those installers on all those machines, do my post-capture, create my file, and off and roll, and I'd go. Okay? So there's lots of ways to take advantage of that already done work if you need to. Yes, sir? STIG doesn't matter to us. I'll answer that one because we're so independent of the operating system, we won't even see them. Okay? Which can introduce a couple problems or options. You can have an application that might get broken because a DLL is considered bad, and we would be able to hide from them. So you need to put together a process to make sure that that application that you're deploying out there is good. Okay? Because we could hide from that. One of my commands is using the MD5 checksum, and they scan machines. If it doesn't have the right checksum, they delete it. They go find the ThinApps. It doesn't have the right checksum, they just delete it, right? Which helps them to maintain their environment, right? So that's one. The first part of that question was, I missed the first part. Okay. Yes, dependent level are hardware dependencies. So we'll use Adobe as an example. If you use Adobe Pro, it has a hardware level driver and technically cannot be ThinApped, right? But if I install Adobe Pro without the printer piece, then I can ThinApp it. So you have to put some thought process into that and separate out those hardware level devices and make them part of the operating system versus part of the application package. It's not hard to do. There's lots of guides on how to do that and some of the thoughts around that, but Adobe is one of the best examples of that because you can install it now without the print driver and then move the print driver down to the operating system. Yes, sir? So is there anything going in the future with Vue with zero install? There's a lot of discussion around that because we have a lot of contractors that need to be able to do things and people that are in remote commands and people sitting on the NMCI network where they can't install things and all that wonderful stuff. So it is something that is on our attention, okay? We are looking at how we're going to do that. But right now, what I'm encouraging users to do is ThinApp it. If you ThinApp it, the only thing that you don't get is printing and USB. And you can definitely ThinApp it and go down that path, right? So that your users download a ThinApped application, it's self-contained executable, you can even manage it, all that wonderful stuff, and off and roll and they go. I have a lot of users doing that. I have one agency that does the, you guys all seen this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds, right? They do the same thing. You close the application, it sends out a little command and comes back, finds itself, and deletes the executable. So you literally could go to a kiosk, grab hold of your machine, do your stuff, and as soon as you close out of it, it finds its executable and deletes it, and off and roll and you go. You were going to say something?
Actually, we had an interesting time. I'm a DOD member as well, working with NMCI clients. I teach at the Naval Postgraduate School using VMware Vue. My NMCI clients couldn't get onto it. ThinApp the Vue client, sent her a copy, put it on as a standard user, no administrative privilege required, which normally is, and we were able to continue on the NMCI machine without a problem.
Yeah.
Really well for us.
Yeah, you don't need any elevated permissions. The only reason you would need elevated permissions to run the Vue client is if you want to install USB or printing, right? But you can ThinApp it, you don't get those two features, and off and roll you go. And one of the things that's nice is we do run in user mode, not elevated mode, so anything that happens within that executable is contained within that executable. Yes, sir? Does VMware support running Vue? Yes. I'm not sure I'm following your question. Oh, is it supported running the Vue client in a ThinApp? Yes. And if anybody from support tells you no, you just tell them the bald-headed guy said, right? Definitely it is supported, okay? It's not supported for USB and printing. There are those caveats, but yes, it is definitely supported. Other questions? Yes, sir. So the virtualization around 3D graphics. So we're going to go into a whole NDA discussion here. Yes, there's lots of work being done there. Now, some of the things that you have to take into play is if I have 3D graphics, right now we technically don't support them, right? And the reason is that I don't know the answer to yet. Some of the things that we're looking at is creating a graphics adapter that is virtual. That's one thing, right? Now, the side effect of doing that is if I start to put a lot of work into this graphics adapter, well, guess what? That's going to eat up CPU resources, okay? And the number one thing that we always get beat up on in a view environment is cost, right? If you look back 2 years, our estimate per machine was $1,000 per machine. You could go out and buy a PC for $500, right? That math didn't seem to work out too well. So we're trying to drive that cost down. How do we drive that cost down? Greater density. Now, if you start introducing 3D graphics, my density goes down, my cost starts to go up. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, well, what if I could offload it to a graphics adapter in the physical machine? And we're looking at that also. But that also has a side effect of cost going up. Those graphics adapters are expensive. Right? So we're looking at both of those avenues so that we can address that. What I have people doing right now is offloading it to a local mode. So they're going to offline or local mode so that they can take advantage of the device drivers on the actual physical machine and run it from that perspective. You get all the wonderfulness of View for automation and management and all that good stuff, but you offload that adapter to the local device. So there's some options there. Other questions? Yes, sir. So crosstalk. I, as a user, decide I don't like you because you've got more hair than I do, and I want to mess with your machine in the classroom. Yes, there is a way to do that. Anil Carmel, who is with Department of Energy down at Los Alamos, has written a reference architecture. He's a good friend of mine. He and I used to work together. Written a reference architecture on how to eliminate crosstalk. Okay? And it's basically using vShield zones. So he's doing some isolation so that users can't crosstalk, because that is at sometimes a risk or a reward, depending on how you want to look at it. So there's definitely ways to do that. I don't know the answer to that. If you want, I can introduce you to Anil, and he would love to hear somebody that's interested. Sometimes he gets a little geeky, but yeah, he'd love to tell you all about it. So catch me afterwards, and I'll introduce you to him. Another question? Yes, sir. Can I have what? You can run, so you can technically run a VClone as fault tolerant. Mm-hmm. Of that actual workstation, correct? Mm-hmm. I'd have to look at that a little deeper. There's going to be some limitations that you're going to run into. I know that you can take a standalone workstation, fault tolerance it, connect it with View, right? But as you're starting to do that with VClones, there's a lot of issues in regards to how we do distribution. So I'd need to do some research on that. I think you can do it, but I think isn't a promise. So definitely have to look deeper into it. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yes. That's gone. I haven't heard of that in at least 18 months. I know what you're talking about, but that's gone. One of the things, just to throw a little information out there, one of the things that we're doing is we're going downstairs from this local segment all the way out to Verizon and Terramark, no issues. Okay. Now, one of the things you have to keep in mind is PCOIP is a UDP protocol. So you need to make sure that you have all those things open. Don't be like one of my customers that had a split connection, and they were trying to shove it down both pipes. It causes great confusion. So you have to change the way that you route your UDP packets, but it works just fine. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Not yet. So the question is can I dynamically have my machine go offline? Not yet. It is something that we're definitely looking at, and that's where we will end up being. It'll almost be like almost a vMotion to your local device. So there's a lot of thought going into what we're doing there, but that is not an easy problem to solve. We have to maintain data. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and what you will see is as we start to break apart the underlying disk, the VMDKs, it's all for a reason, so that we can start to do some of that stuff. Now, that won't be an instantaneous vMotion. It'll be more like a, hey, you just lost connectivity. Would you like to move local and fire off from there? So maybe a 30-second process versus a true vMotion. But that is something we're looking at way out in the future. Other questions? Yes, sir. So the question is how do I design for an offline desktop with ThinApp in mind? And yes, we can deploy locally, okay? And you would want to use that particularly if you had something like an offline desktop that you were looking at. How do you reclaim that application? There's a couple ways you can reclaim that application. Technically, everything is a permission, okay? So you can maintain it via permissions. The other thing you could do is you could do it via app sync. Okay? And app sync is the ability to put in basically a line of code into the ThinApp application, tell it where home is. So home could be a web server, home could be a file share on your network. Okay? And it is then required to check in and see if there's updates available. So let's say I have Office 2007 and I want to deploy an update and I want to make sure my users get it. I can make my convergence window something like 3 days. And if my user's running their machine and they're disconnected and they don't touch home within 3 days, next time they try and launch the application, a little pop-up says, you haven't checked in, application not available. Right? That's one way of doing it. And then they would call the help desk and they say, hey, I can't run my office. And they'd say, well, you need to connect to the network, get any updates. Your updates would get applied. They'd then be able to use it. And then you could also resend an application from a user or delete an application just by making it no longer available. So there are ways to get around that so that you can manage that remotely. And you could do it via the ThinApp portal built into View. You could resend it from there. So however you want to do it, the options are yours.
I made it available on a group basis if I want to reclaim it on an individual basis.
If you want to reclaim it on an individual basis, I believe when you go in and dig into it, there is a way to resend it from that particular desktop. So, other questions? I've got 4 minutes.
If anybody wants to see any of it running live, again, I'm from the Naval Postgraduate School. I set up labs just similar to what Dave's talking about. I can show you what I've got live if you want to see it. If anybody wants my contact information, we've been deploying labs for about a year now, working with VMware. Give you some really good stories, can show you, what's gone, how things have gone. I've got bandwidth measurements for what it's taking to run, X number of VMs, processing power, et cetera. I can give you some ideas of what I'm running on, things like that too. So I can be available as a member of the DOD as well. So feel free to catch up with me afterwards after the session.
One of the funny things Scott and I were talking about up here that's kind of funny, and I'll give you this as warning, as closing thoughts. So Scott did this, about a year ago, right? Yeah, so he went through this whole process about a year ago, has built his environment, and been off and running. There's another side of postgraduate, right, that was only worried about the ThinApps. That's all they worried about, right? They didn't want to worry about virtual desktops. They were only worried about the applications because that was their biggest problem. I was telling them, I was on a call with that group on Friday. They're in a panic because they are being forced by guys like him to come up with a strategy and figure out how they're going to deploy View desktops. So they're in this panic, and we're going to go through a design and architecture session this week so that they can figure out how to build this out so that this guy will get off their case, right? And the warning I give to you on this is it takes off very, very fast. Yeah. I've got a customer in Milwaukee that they deployed this out. It was for a 100-user problem. Before I could leave that week, that 100-user problem had turned into a 400-user problem. Within 6 months, it turned into a 1,600-user problem. Within 18 months, it had turned into a 16,000-user problem, right? That's how quickly it grows. So when you go into this, do your homework. Get everything ready to go. Don't do this just accidentally because you will regret it. As my old XO used to say, the stupid shall be punished, okay? And what he meant by that is if you don't do this correctly, you will get punished. It may change your career path, okay? So make sure you put a lot of thought into this so that when this does take off, you're ready and you're reactive and proactive versus being caught by surprise, okay? Any other questions out there? Yes? The lowest bandwidth that it will work effectively is a it depends answer, okay? When I do my expense reports, I'll give you an example. You have to have a minimum of 100K available to make the connection. There's a little check in there we do, okay? But that doesn't mean we need 100K, all right? So I'd go in, log into the web page, open up my email, and that takes like 30K. And then I go, uh-oh, where's my receipts? I grab my wallet, start pulling them out. I'm at 0K, 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 0K. I get all my receipts together, I tape them to the paper, I do my whole scanning thing, I send them in, right? And then I start doing more expense stuff. And then I go back to 50K, maybe 100K. And then I get bored and I open up a video and I watch something funny on YouTube, and that takes a couple 100K. And then I go back to doing expenses, et cetera, et cetera. It really depends on what you're doing, okay? If I'm doing typical office work, 30K is what you can average out. Now, for design purposes, I always design with 150K per user in mind, because I know that there's going to be spikes and then there's going to be drop-offs and all that good stuff. So that's kind of the thought you need to go in with, but it really depends on what you're doing. The other thing I'll warn you, don't be like everybody else. Just because you can watch 24 on a virtual machine doesn't mean you should, okay? Because that's bandwidth intensive. Now, the funny part is every time I go meet with a customer, that's the first thing I want to do. High definition video, right? Let's go watch an episode of 24. And I'm like, dude, this is like a rental car. You don't drive your desktop that way. When's the last time you watched an episode of 24 at work? And they pause for a second, and they're like, you're right. So you got to put some thought into what's going on and do some statistic collecting. If you have a design engineer that does heavy graphics, well, you need to take that into account. If you have a receptionist that doesn't do heavy graphics, you need to take that into account. So there's a lot of options there. I can't give you a hard number. I can only give you it goes all over the place. Okay? Last question. Any more? It's been great. Oh, you got one? Go ahead. That is for PCOIP. Yeah, RDP, it doesn't do the check. And the reason we do it with PCOIP is because we've had some people try and trick this and do it over like a 50K connection. And then they call us, and there's a whole bunch of problems, and it just doesn't work out well. So there's this little piece of code in there that checks for that available bandwidth, and off and roll we go. Any other questions? You've been great. Thank you very much. If you need any assistance, please reach out to your SEs or your sales teams, and they can get you in touch with the appropriate people. Thank you.